the rest of the week. Today we'll go through the kind of get the Tea Party set right up to the eve of revolution or eve of independence. So tomorrow we can talk about the Declaration of Independence. So please have that read. The grievances give you an idea how they try to blame everything on the king, but the big one we need to know, or when you read it, especially the second and third paragraph, because that is the justification for independence. And it is brilliant. That is absolutely brilliant. And probably at the end, probably tomorrow too, I'll give you your kind of review list for the test, because we will have a test next week. And also, I'm going to be gone for 2 days next week. It's going to be tough for you, I know. So we'll probably have some in-class assignment on Thursday, then Friday, bring good shoes, because it's going to be a timed run. And I'm thinking about just taking you up Lincoln. And you must run back before the period ends.
So we have to go there and then come back. Even though when you're driving,
You're right. We should run there, then come back. Thank you. Does that make sense to everybody? So, oh, there's a path. That should be a fun run. I'll be gone. I get tired of it, but somebody else does. We'll talk more about it. Is that kind of unfair?
No, I just feel like
Great Falls?
feeling like you're left out.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, gosh, don't worry about me. Don't worry about me, but thank you. But don't worry. And then what? Well, it's already February, so we don't have much time left. We got to get through everything. Two. All right. So where do we finish in here? Oh, the Quartering Act, right? Did we get to the Quartering Act of the Townshend Act, where they set the tax and once again try to cut those taxes on tea? And did we talk about where they were quartered? Is that right when the bell rang?
The highest
They were right
Yeah.
in colonists.
And there are a significant number of people didn't have a place to live. But then the poor who had little tiny hovels, these one-room little places, that's where the privates would stay. Now, how did people sleep? Are there sleeping quarters? Huh?
They got
One bed. And wealthy people had down for a mattress. What's down? Feathers. If you were middle class, you had straw. And then hay. For the poor, which would be awful. Maybe we could do that. We could bale hay. We could do a little baling on farming. Is that better for Friday? There. And you get 5 points extra credit in your math class if you go bale hay. Just tell your math teacher.
Mr. Partry,
Yeah, we would have Mr. Peterson. Just go tell him. Mr. Larson said that we get 100 points extra credit. Yes.
Mr. Larson.
It would have Mr. Chart. So we get 1,000 points. Mr. Mahaller said so. So with that, re discontent. That's my life. No. Well, you have one bed, and everyone's in it. And so think about husband, wife, 3 or 4 kids, and a private. And what's going to happen? Or at least people are going to think it's going to happen. What do you think? You got this man brought in, sleeping next to a daughter or a wife. Yeah. Okay, it's awful. And it's going to happen, or at least, I guess it really doesn't matter if it happened or not, but people are going to think that. And if you believe it happened, then it happened to you. If you believe it, it's true to you. And so, there's already going to be upset about having these soldiers with you, listening to everything you say, always watching. You never quite know where they think, because they're strangers, taking your food, taking everything, and then doing this. And then, people worked piecemeal. Most people who didn't have much money, they worked whatever jobs they could get. Now, this is pre-industrial revolution, pre-capitalism. Don't think about wages like we do today. But people are working for whatever wages they can get and making things like rope or whatever. And they're paid usually about how much they produce. but still, not our wage system today. Soldiers don't make a lot of money. So in their off time, they would take some of those jobs. What did that do to the wages of the people of Boston? If you have all of a sudden all these soldiers coming in taking some of their work, it drops wages. This is an economic truism. When there's higher unemployment, wages drop. If there's more people looking for work, wages go down. Because companies now can kind of play one unemployed person against another. When there's very few people looking for work, wages go up. Because now the worker, the employee, can kind of use his position or her position to bargain up wages. So they bid against them. So you can see that. So like in your lifetime when we had the Great Recession and the economic disaster of 2008 to 2012, wages dropped and they're just now getting back to where they were in 2007, right now. Like we lost a decade. Which is, it hurts people like me, but I was already old. It really hurts people who are just starting. Really hurt them. And that's an economic reality. That's what people were doing then. And we see that today, it is filming. So, there's a lot of people upset at these British soldiers. So all it would take is just one spark by 1770. And it was a cold winter. And there's something else. What about all those people who don't have homes? In the winter, where do they live? Or sleep. They set up these poorhouses. So think about a rickety kind of warehouse they would set up about the size of this room. So it's not going to have much heat. I guess the heat would be maybe a stove, but for the most part, the other people packed in. How many people could you put in this room? They would put hundreds in a room this size. No, they would not stack them like cordwood, but almost. What they would do is this. Think about one side, they would attach a rope, then pull it taut to the other end. And then about 2 feet another rope, and another. So you get that image of a bunch of ropes. And then everybody would come in. They would kind of come in at night, and that's where they would sleep. The poor of the poor. So they kind of walk down this line with in between the ropes, get to where they're, to stop, and then what? Arms over the ropes. That's how they slept. Can you imagine these building? And those patriot leaders pushed that resentment against the British. Of course, they're always worried, what if they got mad at the patriot leaders, who had pretty nice homes, but they were there in these homes and blamed the British. So British soldiers were told, don't go out alone. Always be with another soldier. Be very wary. And there were a number of attacks. And that's how it started that March day leading up to the Boston Massacre. The Boston Massacre. And by the way, massacre, remember I mentioned Bacon's Rebellion? And how rebellion, the way you use language? Think about what massacre tells you. I mean, that's implying that people were gunned down in cold blood. Was it a massacre?
5 people killed.
Yeah, you think about it. Is 5 people a massacre? What is it like? 5 people not a massacre, 6 people a massacre? If you gun down people in cold blood, it's a massacre, probably. And if you know them, then it's a massacre. And so that's just semantics, but that word means a lot. Just by saying it. So, November, they're worried about tax collection, so the customs house where they collect taxes, they foolishly called troops. Think about what happens if you already got people upset, and all of a sudden, a squad of soldiers come in with fixed bayonets. Wouldn't that just rile everyone up even more? Basically, to stop a riot, they created a riot. And then they started throwing snowballs and manure and everything else at them, yelling insults. And what insult really bit British soldiers? The name they call them, not redcoats, there's another one. You ever heard the term, and they read it, lobsterbacks? Why do they call them lobsterbacks? Everyone thinks, and I did too the first time, think lobsters cook and they turn red, right? So, what is it? We know why? Okay, think about European style fighting. They had to march 30 to 30 paces from the enemy and load and fire while they're shooting in your faces. And by the way, if you're wounded, especially hit the gut, you're done. How do you get people not to do a very human thing, which if they're shooting at my face, I'm going to run? How do you get them to not do that? You make them more afraid of the officers than they are of the enemy. You remember the cat o' nine tails? Remember I brought that up? The whip. For the most minor offense, they would whip soldiers. For the most minor offense, and thumb them and things like that, where they'd hang them by their thumbs for 4 or 5 hours, things like that. So the cat o' nine tails would come out, and I'm not exaggerating. If you're marching in line and you turn your head, that could be 5 lashes for the cat o' nine tails. What would their back look like? Yeah, like a lobster's back, all rippled up with scars. Who else? Who else is back? Slaves. So they're not only mocking them for that, they're calling them like your slaves. You gave up. You're willingly do this, so I'm a free man. So lobsterback that's a big insult. I mean, that's a major insult. Lobsterback. And so they're yelling at him. Somebody drops a musket. Almost certainly that's what happened. It went off. Boom, everybody opens fire. There was probably not an order given, but they're scared. And you put people like that when they're scared, stuff like this happens. Well, here's the thing. The army wanted them to take them back for a trial in London. But the royal governor, Hutchinson, they mentioned in the movie, also read about him. Hutchinson realized correctly colonists will go nuts. Because they would think, logically, that they'll go back to England and nothing will happen. They'll get off scot-free. So, the trial for 8 soldiers, the trial will be in Boston. Hard to find an impartial jury. Jury trials go back to English common law. Heck, they go back to Roman history. That's kind of where that starts from our historical point of view in the United States. Had a trial. 8 soldiers. And John Adams, one of the leading patriots, would represent them. He is the defense attorney. Now, part of the reason he did it, and they mentioned it in that video we saw the other week, was they would get a fair trial. If we're fighting for liberty here, if we're fighting for liberty for everybody in the colonies, then we must also make sure that people who are charged of a crime in the colonies, even massacre, will get a fair trial. So that was it. It's a symbol. But there's another reason. And it goes back to those people who were the Sons of Liberty and the others who surrounded them. They wanted to control, as Adams would have said, the mob. Now, you read about this in chapter 4 of Zen. Let me read you. Maybe you caught this, maybe you didn't. I know when you start reading something and kind of how ridiculous this would sound. Adams is calling the people who gathered around the soldiers, the 5 men who were shot, the 8 who were wounded. This is what he refers to them. They were a motley rabble of saucy boys, Negroes and mulattoes, Irish teagues, and outlandish jack tars. So let me ask you something. First off, he's calling, these are Sons of Liberty, he's calling them a motley rabble. These are people that supposedly Adams is trying to instigate some kind of movement to give them more rights, soon to be independence. Doesn't really care about them. And partially it's defense, so he's trying to say whatever. But what's a saucy boy? Saucy boy. I think of a bad band. A bad boy band. The Saucy Boys. That's going to be at our next assembly. The Saucy Boys will perform. Anybody know what a saucy boy is? Saucy. How many different ways can I say that? Well, yeah, I know. Saucy. Okay, that kind of thing. Towns that are big, towns that just are really growing, especially ones that are pre-industrial going into more modern. Well, when people go there and can't find work, it's not like they can also just like get food. They have no money to feed, let's say, children. This is endemic in these kind of developing towns to this day. If a family can't afford to feed their children, what do? Kick them out when they're 9 or 10. And they go roam the streets. Now, don't forget, different era, different ideas of what adulthood is, but still, just kick them out. So you're going to have all these children running around committing petty crimes just to survive. They're juvenile. That's a saucy one. By the way, if you're a delinquent, you're not saying hey, they're one of us. No. Adams is implying that they're inferior. He's implying the British had no choice. They're a bunch of saucy boys. And what do you do when you're surrounded by saucy boys? You walk in the hallway. Can't escape them. Negro. Remember Bacon's Rebellion? Fornication laws? Slave codes? In 100 years, racism has now become predominant. So what's he saying? They were a bunch of inferior saucy boys, and what's he saying about Negroes? Inferior to what? What's a mulatto? Yeah.
It's like a mix.
African and European. That African, inferior. This is what he's saying. They're inferior. He's implying, what did you expect them? What did you expect these 8 men to do here? He's trying to defend them in their first trial. What do you expect them to do when they're surrounded? They had no choice but to fire. They're not guilty of manslaughter. They had no choice. They're surrounded by a bunch of these inferiors who colonized Ireland in the 17th, 15th, or the 16th and 17th century. England and Britain. They brutally colonized Ireland. Brutally. If you know anything about Irish history, you understand why to this day the Irish do not like the British. For good reason. That's why you don't wear orange on St. Patrick's Day, especially in Dublin. But that was meant to be an insult. Because one of the ways to justify it, every country will justify colonization by saying, we're taking over the land of inferiors. And that anti-Irish prejudice will go on to in the United States for years. In fact, when biological science was first created at the end of the 19th century, they would make up over 39 different races, kind of a hierarchy of races. And Irish were a separate race from other Europeans, and they were inferior to that first racial chart, which is patently ridiculous, but it's just racial prejudice. A Teague, that's a stevedore. We all know what a stevedore is, right? So, moving on. That's a stevedore. How about a longshoreman? They unload ships. And think about what kind of work that would be. Awful, dirty, backbreaking work. What kind of people are going to get that job? And then, what's an outlandish jack? Tar! Yes. But you notice, Jefferson and Newton, still on. Still here. No, see? He's stuck. Sorry, Tom. All right. That's a sailor, and that's like the lowest position on the ship. So, what's he saying? They're all inferior. They're all those who deserve to be shot. Remember, these are the Sons of Liberty for the most part. He's trying to control the mob. They're really worried the mob might look and say, okay, we're about the British, but what about guys like John Adams and his nice house? That's unfair. We're being mistreated not just by the British, but by you too. So this is a way to get back control. So the Boston Massacre has a lot of impact on that. It was present on the colonies of the British Massacre, but it's also to regain control of the mob, because Adams is a member of the middle class. The middle class is a small group. Now, I've kind of alluded to this before, and I will come back to this again. So we have the working class, lower class. These are the vast majority of people then and today And what that means is they require everything to survive. You have a few other luxuries, and if they do get them, they have to go into debt to get them. So they have to, that's most people. The upper class, a tiny percentage on top, who don't really need to work. They can afford the luxuries of a country mansion. These things like imported porcelain from China. Thus the term China. For that was like a real symbol of wealth. Middle class are that small group of people between the two classes that they must work, but they make enough extra money to afford some of the trappings of an upper class life. So has everyone got it? They got to work, but they don't need to go into a great amount of debt to afford things like their own home. A big thing back then would be a couple servants, china, silk, a few things like that. This is not the middle of income, like the median. That's not middle class. The median income in the United States is about $60,000 a year for a family. And if you know anything about, let's say you buy a home, you can't buy a home unless you go into a great amount of debt, most people. Especially if you go to a place like San Francisco. And what? Yeah. San Francisco, basically, a tiny little home would be a couple $1 million. Most people can't afford that, so most people are working class. So that's middle class. And that's the middle class rebellion. They want to keep their life they have now. And they're worried that British taxation might imperil it. They're not necessarily for those on the bottom having a better life. Some, but not all. So, middle class revolt. And so that's the Boston Massacre. That's a big deal. That would make a really good question on a test. So, I like that. Thank you for the affirmation. I forgot what I was going to say. 1773. So the British pulled the troops out. They smartly got rid of the towns and duties lapsed, but the Trade and Navigation Acts are still there. And one thing, before you ever get to 1773, there's still a bunch of smugglers. Smugglers were going out, getting goods, bringing them back in. They were pretty blatant about it. They got past the Royal Navy. Oh, they didn't care. There's no one there to stop them. And the thing about smugglers, yes, they're getting around the taxes, but smugglers can always charge more. They can charge a premium compared to other merchants because you have to pay for what? They can charge for what? What do smugglers do? They smuggle, thank you, that's the name, smugglers. What if they get caught? There's an element of danger. Smugglers charge a premium because of the danger. So they can always charge more. So smugglers can make a lot of money from these kind of laws. When the United States did Prohibition in the 1920s, nobody liked Prohibition more than organized crime. Because they can charge a premium. And they were very depressed when they got rid of Prohibition. When states started legalizing marijuana, nobody was more upset than those who used to sell marijuana illegally. Because now they're actually being undercut by legitimate business. So you have these smugglers making money off of this. And they can charge more because everybody thinks, well, we're avoiding the taxes. And so the smugglers are out there working. How do we get around that? And they came up with a great idea. Parliament passed the Tea Act. This goes back to those old Trade and Navigation Acts. And what they said is this. All right, one more time. We'll cut the excise tax on tea. But they'll collect it in a very clever way. They'll make sure that only one company sells tea. Tea. They gave a monopoly to the East India Company. There was also a West India Company. This is one of those joint stock companies. Investors owned it. And the East, it's a pretty cool E, isn't it? Pretty cool. Yep. Try it. Make it read that way. Come on. Here, let me make it for you. Let's see. Where was it for? Ooh, only phosphate. Ooh. Whoa. Are they your cookies? Well, you're vague food. Nice. What kind of Cheetos are those? East India Company. What do you get from the East India Company? Well, East India Company, they pretty much owned India. They owned it. There was no royal colony of India. Much like, remember the Virginia Company did Jamestown? Well, by 1770, the crown had taken over the 13 colonies. But the East India Company would still own India, or at least the colonial possession, up until the 1850s. And this corporation, it's a free corporation, but this company's trying to make money. And stockholders of the company are really upset because they're going broke. They went broke in the 7 Years' War, and they weren't making any money after the war. What does the East India Company sell? Stuff from India. Cloth, various things like that. But they had a monopoly on the East India Company on the sale of tea from China. And so they were trying to get stuff from India that China would buy. This is my India. See, did it, the peninsula? Pretty good, huh? They were trying to find some monopoly. Now, they could find nothing that China wanted for a long time. And if China won't buy anything from India, that means that gold from the East India Company was going for tea. Do you get the point here? They can't make money. But what if we give them a monopoly of all the sales in the colonies? Then they could make money selling tea. And then they will collect the tax. Therefore, we'll solve all the problems they have before. We'll make money for the company, we'll collect the taxes, and we cut it, so how can they complain? By the way, the East India Company, this did not work the way they hoped. They would find a product about 20 years afterwards that they could grow in northern India. What product was that they could sell in China? Yes. Oh, opium, yeah. But you're right, so they started peddling this narcotic, and they would actually go to war twice and destroy China. This would destroy China, and they have not forgotten. And there's reasons why China is doing all these economic things like rebuilding a Silk Road, or at this moment, literally building islands right here to try to expand their territory. And just 2 weeks ago, the U.S. sent 2 destroyers through what they now claim is their land. And we say, no, that's an island that you didn't have. In fact, it wasn't an island, it was a sandbar. And they went right next to it. The Chinese actually targeted the U.S. ships with their surface-to-surface missiles. And no, they didn't fire, but we could have a war in the South China Sea any day now. Anyone know about this little war? A few people did in the last period. You might have heard little bits about it. Do you hear about that? It's a really big deal. They're just making islands. Part of the reason is we're not going to lose our trade advantage we have now, ever. And so with that, back to this. One more thing. Remember their stockholders? This might shock you, but many of the stockholders at the East India Company were also members of Parliament. And they passed a law to enrich whom? That's a conflict of interest. Can you believe they would do that? I have good news for all of you. That would never happen today. Ever. Would not be allowed. The people would drive, no, it's not never. Never is not the right word. What's the word I'm looking for? Always. That almost always happens today. The conflict of interest within government now has never been seen before in our history. So we'll come back to this, but we have times of a lot of corruption, no corruption. We're like the 1890s now. So it's really a fascinating time. That and potential war of China, Kit Kats. So with that, monopoly. Oh, they do one more thing too. They give a license then to people in the colonies to sell the tea. So you get a license, basically just a piece of paper saying you're allowed to sell. You agree to collect the tax. You get the monopoly. They're not giving the license to smugglers. Smugglers are furious. This is the beginning of how John Hancock is going from a smuggler to a great patriot. Because he's mad that his illegitimate business is being undermined. Now, when you have a monopoly on a product that people want, that's the important thing. It's got to be a product that people want. A monopoly on tea, people wanted tea, what can they do to the price of tea? Yeah, potentially. People want it. I mean, just imagine what would happen if somebody has a monopoly on fresh water. What can they charge? Yeah, well, never happened with oil or electricity or water. But, have you been to Flint, Michigan? But, the thing is this, they can charge more. But in the short run, in one of these quirks at how monopolies work, by avoiding the smuggling, they actually, in the short run, undercut the smugglers. Prices dropped and undercut the smugglers. Oops, I have to put smoke. They undercut the smugglers, that's an R. They undercut the smugglers. The smugglers were furious. In the short run, they undercut. Now, here's the thing. In the long run, prices will go up. Because monopolies, prices either always go up or service or quality of what they sell drop. I mean, think about it. If only one company is selling a product you need, what do they care about service? What do they care about quality? Where are you going to go? Do you have any complaints about cable TV or broadband internet? That's a monopoly. That's why. We have a company like that today, that right now, because of them avoiding sales taxes and things like that, they sell less, but eventually they will raise prices. A company that is a monopoly unlike any of the countries I've seen. Right now, a monopoly. And they never make money. It's just absolutely amazing. They don't make money. Google has a little bit of that, but even bigger than Google, but because they sell so much. See it? Amazon. Yeah. Amazon. And they never really, did you stay back there too? Oh, you did good. And Amazon, the thing about it is that they don't really make money. It's just actually fascinating how they do this. But eventually they will. Wow, are they going to raise prices? It's going to happen in a long time. Probably the next 5 or 6 years unless something changes. My assumption is that'll be, I'm old, but I plan on being around for a few minutes. So with that, unnecessary line here is leading up to the Boston Tea Party. Because the Tea Party, everybody thinks it was about taxes. Yeah, they were mad about the taxes. But this goes back to James Otis. It's about control. Who will control your life? And if we, I'm talking about the colonists, if we allow them to create this monopoly, it's not the amount of taxes, it's the monopoly. If we allow that, they can create a monopoly for every product that we need to survive. That means that they could drive not only colonial business out, but they can set the prices and they can starve you. And then economically, we will be destroyed. How you make a living, if you're a merchant or a farmer, gone. And you will become nothing but a slave. It's control. We've got to stop them here. If we allow this, then we lose everywhere we have to make a living. And then what's going to be next? If we have no money here, there goes our government. There goes our laws. There goes our rights. Gone. Heck, they'll bring the troops back. They'll do all of it because there's nothing we can do about it. If we allow this, 2, 3, 4 years down the road, it'll be too late. It's control. And that is why that cold November night, those first 2 ships came into Boston Harbor and they were afraid to unload because there were mobs waiting for them. They're out in the middle of the harbor. That's when the Sons of Liberty engineered a great symbolic effort Started at North Hall. If you ever go to Boston, or some of you have, North Hall's really cool. It's really neat. This big hall and this big open. It looks like a Protestant church, but it was a town hall, meeting hall. And then it used to be about, gosh, no more than 100 yards from the docks. But they have filled in a lot to make up more land, and so now it's about half a mile from the water. But they had a big meeting, and they got everybody all fired up. You know, the British are coming for you. They're going to take your children. You know, they're going to cook you over in stove. You know, they got them all fired up. And then the door burst open, and all these Sons of Liberty came in dressed as what? Mohawk Indians. And they dressed as Mohawk Indians, not as a disguise. Everybody, in fact, they wanted people to know who did it. It's not a disguise. They dressed up as American Indians. They dressed up as Mohawks because of this weird contradiction in colonial thinking. It's the term is dichotomy. American Indians, sure, they were seen as people who, you know, they wanted their land and they're uncivilized, but at the same time, when the first Europeans arrived in the New World and started sending word back, they had never seen anybody like American Indians. The concept of freedom and liberty were almost meaningless in Europe because everybody had this place in society and that's where you were at. And then they saw American Indians living free lives. And they represented a really important word. They represented liberty. And they would draw liberty as, in fact, they called it Lady Columbia going in. Heck, that was a symbol of the U.S. until the 20th century. And it was kind of a Caucasian, but at the same time was also an American Indian. And this symbol, and that represented liberty. If you ever seen the shield of the United States, I'm sure you have the eagle. And one of the talons are 13 arrows to represent that. Now that would go away. And soon Americans would start thinking of themselves as, or not, sorry, citizens of the U.S. would start thinking of themselves as liberty. But then it was American Indians. When they would draw pictures of this, showing the protests, they would draw the 13 colonies as American Indians. It's kind of a contradiction, isn't it? And that's what it would be. So it was a symbol of liberty. They jumped on these whaleboats, all these people, just a few were dressed as Mohawks, and they had torches, and they're screaming and yelling, and they start rolling out at night. Now the crewmen are on these ships, they've been stuck out there. They can see these boats coming, and what can they do in 1773 to get away? You know, this sailboat, you can't put the sails up right away, so they're just stuck. The first boat tried to resist it. They tried to fight them off the boat, and they were overwhelmed. They roughed the crews up, threw them overboard, found the tea. But how did they ship tea back? These big chests, and then how about the tea itself? And they make like a rock hard brick out of it, because it would take 16 months. They would literally like shave it or like pound it with a hammer, and that's how they make the tea. I bet it did not taste all that good, but then again, you know, they dumped it overboard. Oh, one more thing, 1773, nobody knew how to swim. We think swimming today, that's an invention of the 19th century. Doesn't seem like, oh, of course they knew how to swim. No, they actually didn't. So they just kind of flailed around. But the other boat, the crew's watching this. They're going, oh. And so when those whale boats arrived with them, with the Sons of Liberty to the next boat, what did the crew of the second boat do? Here, this is where we keep the tea. Let me help you throw it overboard. And so they weren't beat up. That's the Tea Partry. And how did Britain react when they found out about this 2 months later? It was literally like someone lit an atomic bomb. Why not? They had a fuse. Exploded an atomic bomb in London. Everybody was furious. Even supporters of the colonists were furious. And so they're all thinking, we must punish them. And when is the bell ring? Oh, so let me get this down real quick. Parliament is divided pre-political parties. We're just on the edge of political parties. which are kind of necessary for a republic. It's a necessary, and sometimes can be a necessary evil, I guess. In Parliament, there are two main groups, Whigs, and these are mostly urban and representing merchants. And then a bigger group, because they're so unfairly represented, were Tories. And these are rural, but they don't represent like farmers. They represented this landed aristocracy. The very wealthy. Now, a lot of the Whigs, they're merchants, and they're saying, if we punish them, trade will stop, and we can all lose. William Pitt, remember him from the 7 Years' War? He was a Whig, and he would speak out against punishing them too much. In fact, he made the very famous statement, we can't kill the goose that laid the golden egg. And that's what the colonies are. If we crush them, punish them too much, they might start a rebellion and we can't get them back. Don't do this. But the Tories were furious. And as they saw it, we're on top, they're on the bottom, they must be told. Or they must be made to know their place. Perfect. So tomorrow we finish this. And that's when we have independence. It happens startlingly fast then, at least for the time. Have a great day. Now to the Vietnam War. Boy, I'm bouncing all over the place. Have a good day, everybody. See you. Nick, everyone lunch for everybody. No, you gotta get Cheetos. The Cheetos. Have you ever looked at the ingredients of them?
I have, and I don't care. I care for it because I'm not
I'm jelly.
You know what?
Sorry.
Sweet day in the valley.
Yes.
The American I'm tired of those whiny. I did watch, and I liked the first few seasons, and then I didn't like it.
Once Michael leaves, it kind of goes downhill.
I didn't like it after one of the two when they huh? Well, I can't remember that. The kind of two main characters when they were when they got together.
It's not
Happy birthday! We have a birthday quiz today.
Happy birthday!
Why do you ask them? The British version is really good.
That's what I've heard.
But Ricky Gervais is kind of annoying, but it's really good.
I don't like it so much. I like it.
But why?
I was just wondering, either way you were talking about it, I was just wondering.
Delaney. I would. Yeah. What?
It's a birthday quiz.
It's a birthday. We have a birthday quiz.
Yeah,
Half sheet of paper, number it 1, 2. Did you say 20? 22! It was just going to be She's the birthday girl.
Sorry. Look at my sticker. It's for labor unions.
Oh, cool.
Isn't that funny? I don't know why I just stopped.
Well, I mean,
I'm 17. I'm not a part of the union. Yeah.